I'd like to just ask you to introduce yourself to get us started.
Yeah, so as you can see by the name posted on Zoom, my name is Pablo Chin. I like to go as Pablo Santiago Chin as a composer, mainly because it reflects, my Hispanic heritage. So I'm from Costa Rica.
Mhm.
That's where I grew up for the first 20 years of my life, and that's where I started studying music, and I'm a composer. So I live now in New Hampshire. It's been a long it's been a long journey since leaving Costa Rica. I'm a composer who lives in New Hampshire. I teach in Boston at Longy School of Music, and I'm sure you're gonna have more questions for me that are gonna allow you and everybody listening to know who I am.
What about how do you feel like your Hispanic root like kind of affects your composition writing?
I think quite a bit. Actually, like this spring, I'm gonna be teaching a class that I have been dreaming of teaching for a while at
Mhm.
Dartmouth College. It's called Mestizaje, and it's called like the musics of Latin America.
Mhm.
Mestizaje, which means like mixed race, like right, which is a term very commonly used in Latin America.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, that just teaching that class, makes me be in touch with questions I that have been living with me since I became a musician, since I became a composer, especially,
Mhm.
which is like yeah, like how do you make sense out of like the music that surrounded you while growing up?
Mhm.
All those questions of identity, that have been so pervasive since since for example the like the fusion of nationalisms, in Latin America, uh and all the composers that came along those eras in like the 1930s and 40s.
Mhm.
uh and those are like the composers that I would listen to and be inspired by when I was young and when I started composing. And those are the ideas that they transmitted to you in their music, in their writings.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think whether you hear or not, anything to do with Latin America in my music or not, like those questions like definitely accompany me every time I create.
And your classes, do you teach like how to compose or just music history?
In this class, I teach I teach special well, I teach in the second half of the class like composers, like the music of classical composers from Latin America.
Mhm.
And in the first half I teach mostly history, yeah.
Mhm.
Um since pre-Hispanic times to like instruments, and then like the colonial era, like church music, and then uh folk uh folk styles and genres, and today's like popular genres as well,
Mhm.
uh, which is cool because all of that like I said for myself, all of that definitely inspired many composers of classical music in Latin America. uh,
Mhm.
and and so I think that give you and students like a good sense of like how that traditions that you inherit as a composer enter into you.
Oh, sorry. I think you just froze for a second.
Yeah.
It's okay. But how did you get started composing?
Yeah, how do I start composing? um since I was very young, since I was like 12, 13, perhaps maybe younger. um i I think I always heard music, or more like I imitated music that I heard. Like I remember I was like whistling things, like making up melodies, things like that. So
Yeah.
definitely that's something I wanted to explore very naturally without nobody telling me to do it, uh or telling me that I could do it. I also, while I focus on clarinet when studying music, that was like my main instrument and my only instrument, frankly, for many years. I had a passion for all instruments, like and I think composition is something that when I discovered it, that I could do, allow me to feel what it would be like to play all instruments, which is
Mm,
obviously like a daunting task, but as a composer, I think kind of like, like if you're a writer of literature,
mhm,
like how that allows you to like fulfill these fantasies of what would it be like to be someone in the 17th century,
mhm.
or what would it be to be like a royal person, in
Yeah,
like Tsar's Russia, or like, like fantasies of how would it be like to be people who you are not, basically.
yeah,
And composing allowed me to like have the fantasy of what it's like to be a violinist, or like what it's like to be a horn player. Eventually I had a teacher in Costa Rica. My clarinet teacher just told me, like if you want to compose, just compose. Don't wait for somebody to teach you how to compose. And then, yeah, maybe around 15, 14, 15, I started to actually write down things.
wow. Maybe I should start.
Totally. I think, yeah. And there are like musicians, I have had students who in theory classes, things like that, who,
Yeah.
like hand me their pieces, but they are like, but I'm not a composer, but here's some piece I wrote. And I would be like, wait, but if you compose, that means you're composing, that means you're a composer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think like all musicians should compose.
What inspires you nowadays then, like to start a composition?
That's a good question. What inspires me nowadays? I think many things. Definitely ideas I have had already inspired me for previous pieces that come back.
Mhm,
Um, like for example, a piece or like an idea that's gravitating around my head right now a lot is a concerto for double bass and orchestra that I'm gonna be writing at some point during this year,
mm,
perhaps at the end of the year. Um, and what inspired me about that, well, besides the soloist that I have in mind, which is a dear friend, the orchestra, which is a community orchestra here in New Hampshire that I joined last semester, that I have been playing with and getting to know,
mhm,
is the idea that I explore in two previous concertos, which is writing music for amateur musicians, who play in orchestras. So that started like many years ago, but friend conductor from Venezuela who works at Scripps College. His name is David Kubek. He challenged me many years ago, about like, your music is very difficult. You write only for specialists of contemporary music, but I conduct this orchestra with non-music majors. Like, could you write us something,
mhm,
they could play? And I did one concerto for him, and then I did a second one last year. 10 years after the first one. And so now I have this new opportunity, of writing for double bass and the community orchestra here. And so that's something that inspired me, for example. It's like something that's born out of music that I already wrote, like previous projects.
mhm,
I feel like are very good ideas that have like a potential to keep expanding. So other things that may inspire me, like a book, a piece of literature, a movie. There's a piece that I wrote a couple of years ago based on insects, like
oh
uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I like
videos
that
of,
one.
yeah, and I took the videos myself.
Oh
So
really?
uh, so there are a couple of things that may inspire me based on that project. One is the insects, and the other is the discovery that I can make the videos myself for my own pieces. So
No,
maybe,
I was really interested, like for what's it, war mature, war mature over. Sorry,
oh,
but
they warm over tour.
yeah, warm overture.
Uh-huh, yeah.
Like, how did you get the video for that one? I was curious about that one.
That one I took in Rochester, where my in-laws are from.
Yeah.
So my father-in-law has this pretty cool house, like pretty much in the middle of a forest.
Yeah.
And there's a lake that you can walk to very easily. And
Mhm.
so I was hanging out in this lake, and then I just saw this worm kind
Mhm.
of like going back and forth, and then I started just videotaping it. Um, and that's what came first in the what I call the insect opera. That's what came first. It's just like the motions of this worm. Uh, I think it served for a great opening.
I really like that one. I was
Thank you.
wondering about the vocalizing in that piece, like if it was like what it meant. Like I wasn't really sure.
Yeah, so well, first of all, like the piece was eventually like started to be thought as an opera where insects would be the characters.
Mhm.
At least that was the approach. And then I proposed the idea to a friend of mine who lives in Panama. She's Panamanian. Her name is Amara Zamora Rivera. And she's like a multidisciplinary artist. I know her because she's a double bass player, and I have written music for her ensemble, but she's also a poet. She writes also literature. She's an specialist on like deep listening, so she does a lot of things. And because I know she's a great poet too, I told her, would you be interested in writing a libretto for this project?
Mm.
Then she was on board, and so we met every week, and I showed her the videos of the insects, and then we started to brainstorm, of like what these insects are like, as personality wise. I mean, personality, as obviously it's hard not to anthropomorphize them,
Yeah.
um, to like see them from the lens of humans, but we try to actually see them from their own lens. And so a lot of the text is onomatopoeic, or a lot of the text she came up with is like sounds that she was imagining that they produce,
Mm.
or based on research that actually they sound like that. So she was trying to put words and that sounded like those sounds.
Mm.
um, and a lot of the text is like that. Some of the text is actually well, the other part of the text is in Spanish, and it's actually telling like reflections or thoughts, or more like poetic text based on the lives of the insects or on what's depicted on the video. So it's a mixture, yeah, between onomatopoeias and actual meditations or
Mm.
reflections on the insects.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
thanks for that. I was just curious.
yeah.
Um, but what's like a theme you want to like carry over your compositions? Because I feel like you're talking about how it's sort of all sort of connected, like how you start a new composition, right?
Yeah, you mean like like an overall theme, or like a connect
Yeah.
between all the pieces I write?
Yeah, like a theme.
That's a good question. I don't think that I'm thinking necessarily of the connections between all my pieces every time I write a new piece. I definitely have subgroups of pieces that connect with one project or another. Like I said, for example, the concertos, that I feel like that's gonna become like a series of pieces that I could revisit.
Yeah.
Uh, the work on insects, I think that's something that I want to keep expanding on. I have, let me see what else. I mean, I can see, well, there's another thing I have been exploring, which is transcribing clarinet improvisations that I have been doing, and then using that as material for different type of pieces, like a current piece I'm writing for is for saxophone and live electronics, like a
Mhm.
synthesizer. And so that's the based on those clarinet improvisations. And I wrote another piece some years ago that I'm revising for instruments and voice, and that's also based on those clarinet improvisations. So you
Mhm.
see, like I can like group projects based on where the material come from or the inspiration. So but in terms of like if there's one single theme that connects all my pieces, I don't know if I could pin
Mm.
down. to just one thing. Yeah.
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 Um, you said you include like electronic sound in your music, or for the saxophone one?
Sometimes I do. Yeah.
I know that I was talking to other composers that I think some of them are a little bit like wary about electronics being like implemented into like new compositions and like AI. Like, how do you feel about that? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, a couple of different things are mentioned in there, right? Like one is just like your relationship to electronics itself, but electronics I think can have so many implementations, like including just like things that don't sound. So let me start by saying, like one of the reasons I started developing this interest in electronics is because of a couple of classes I started teaching at Longy School of Music, um, based on technology.
Mhm.
So that forced me to like be more in touch with the medium and try to find more possibilities, expressive possibilities that I could use in my music. Um, but I mean, technology is so vast, it's so broad, like you could use technology to aid your compositional process, but still write only for acoustic instruments. You could use technology for just producing sounds and make pieces that are just for electronic sounds, and not for performers. You could use music. You could use technology for combining both things, like right, like performers and live electronics.
Yeah.
Uh, you could use technology to produce scores, that like something we did, for example, yesterday in my class called interactive music, where we're using technology to create like an interactive score
Mm.
where the computer is the one telling the performer what's the next section to play, and sections come at random, so you don't know what's gonna be next.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily always something that you're gonna hear about AI. I have tried to be informed as much as I can, but again, it's something very broad. Um, and honestly, like my initial thoughts about it, is that, well, first of all, that it's gonna be hard for AI to catch up with the highest points of creativity that humans
Okay.
come up with. But on the other hand, like I think for composers who are starting to compose,
Mhm.
I think it can be an interesting tool to like understand the difference between, like what is it to be truly, I don't want to say necessarily original, because that can have bad connotations, like what is really original music. But
Right.
what is it to be, to make your own music? What is it to like to aim in your learning process to develop your own language,
Mhm.
music that reflects how you feel about music, or how you hear music. Um, Whereas, like if you don't have that goal as a composer, I feel like you could easily write music that's not so different from AI. And I think AI can serve as a challenge, for like all of us composers to understand, like what is music that's generic, what
Mhm.
is music that is algorithmic based on like things that like sounds like other things, and how can we aim for music that's not AI music, right? Like
Yeah.
because we can end up writing music that's very similar to AI music.
Right.
Those are my thoughts so far about it.
Yeah. And some of them are like, I feel like it takes authenticity like away from composing. Like, I can see how that, see people see that. But
Yeah.
like, what are other challenges you think composers face other than AI?
Well, I think today community, like becoming part of a community is a challenge.
Mhm.
Um, Interestingly, throughout the pandemic, that was raised as a problem, but also the pandemic became partially a solution to that because all of a sudden, like some of your collaborators, some of your public who lived in places far away came together,
Yeah.
virtual space. So it's like on the one hand, it makes you realize the pandemic made you realize that communities are very scattered,
Hmm.
and at the same time it offered potential solutions. But then once the pandemic is over, we want to like be doing music and listening to music in person.
Hmm.
And again, those I think those problems come back up to the surface, of like I mean, we're all like familiar with the concert experience, especially with contemporary music where audiences are small, like 20 people, even 15 people, concerts where even only 10 people may come, right? um and so I think like we're all trying to like find our audiences and like bring our communities together and understand like to what communities we belong. And so I think that's a big challenge for contemporary music and for classical music in general. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, like I feel like there's also in the classical music industry, at least, there's like this reputation about like modern classical music that it's like too
Mhm.
atonal or like hard to listen to, you know? And I feel like that's something composers really have to try to get past.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting how like atonal has become this all-encompassing label, to like define music that's unfamiliar. Like immediately whenever you listen to something that's unfamiliar, or like something that may sound strange, or something that may sound dissonant, or like harsh, or like tense, you come up with that label of atonal, and so it's become like for many people it's become like a negative connotation of or a negative adjective for labeling these musics.
Mhm.
But then that prevents us from really seeing the like the detail and the specificities of different musics, that often composers are not really thinking that what they're making is atonal. They're thinking of,
Yeah.
yeah, like like you said with electronic music, like well, if you're gonna do music concrete and you're gonna go and record samples of like field recordings, things like that, and you put them together, and the results, like you listen to cicadas, cicadas are
Yeah.
and they're pretty dissonant, but they are pretty rich in timbres and colors. So you may say that's atonal, but you also may say that's fascinating, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, but for sure, like it's challenging to like have an interest on music that sounds different than the mainstream, and try to like convince your audiences or potential audiences that that's worth listening to, because it's an alternative, and it's a different world of discovery, and you're hoping to like find new things in that you won't find in other styles of music.
Are there any like trends or like no, not trends, like foundations that sort of help widen the view for modern or widen the audience for modern music?
You mean like to look help them come closer
Yeah.
to her music?
Yeah.
um
Like the online communities you were talking about earlier.
oh, I see, like initiatives, or like
Yeah.
concert series, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think I'm thinking right now, for example, of the Score Follower page on YouTube. There's a YouTube page called Score Follower, and I think they have been very successful in attracting like for contemporary music standards, a lot of people.
Mhm.
We're talking of like more than 1,000 views per upload that
Uh-huh.
they make. And their basis is the basis of their project is that they present a contemporary music piece by a living composer along with the score, so you
Mm,
can see like what the music look like. Um, so I think that has been successful in like attracting people just to see like how the scores look like, because often contemporary music scores can be really beautiful,
mhm,
and some people are very visually oriented. So I think, and one advantage of contemporary music is that often, I think for classically formed musicians, it can be a challenge to follow because we are used to follow, or we were educated in like a standard notation.
mhm.
But for people who don't know how to follow a traditional score, actually contemporary music may be easier to follow because it's very graphic, it's very visually oriented, and often what you hear is really what you see. Like something goes up, you see something go up.
Yeah,
Something gets louder, you see more things. Something gets softer, you see less things, right?
yeah.
Um, yeah, it depends too on what city you live in, like cities like New York or Chicago have tons of like concert series and festivals,
Mhm.
um, and often affordable for students or young people to attend. So, but for example, where I live, in New Hampshire, we are pretty isolated in terms of like cultural events. So it's a little more challenging to like help people come closer to this type of music. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I was gonna ask if you thought what's like a good way to make like modern music more like accessible to like students, because I feel like if there isn't a young audience, then there won't be an audience in the future.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I think composers must come to terms with the fact that you have to communicate with people. Like it's not just enough to like write a piece and in your room and then hand the piece
Hmm.
and and then let people figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I think when audiences often say like I don't understand contemporary music, and then composers we would be like, well, this is not music that you should understand or not. I think maybe we should acknowledge that by understand people mean many things beyond just understand, like just to connect or like identify with, or like like
Mm.
understand means so many things, and I think we can help people understand, we can help
Yeah.
people connect, we can help people relate to
Yeah.
the listening experience. So I think that's one place to start with, is communicating. Every time we have an opportunity, every time we have a performance of our music, we should talk to people.
Mm.
Pre-concert talks, we should be there, to talk to people after the concert. We should be open, like to the questions that people bring to us, and just be honest about the process of our composition process, about our inspiration, about what we were aiming for.
Mm.
The other thing I think that can help is like the idea I was sharing with you about these concertos for amateur musicians, like
Mhm.
like in addition to write music for specialists, for like people who like virtuosos who
Mhm.
can play the most difficult scores. I think more initiatives perhaps should be developed for the same composers who write difficult music, get involved with lesser, I don't want to say lesser skilled musicians, but maybe that's the word, by amateur musicians, by non-music majors, by even involve audiences in performing works here and there, like make them feel participant. I think that's a like an advantage that contemporary music can develop, is the involvement of the audiences in performing,
Mhm.
uh, which is nothing new. That's something that folk music do already. Like when people clap in concerts, or when people
Yeah.
dance, um, and when people can scream and say things during concerts. I think that's audience participation. So I think those are things that can be explored a little more to bring people together to the experience.
Mm. Like
But
about
I think, I'm sorry, just to
sure,
finish, I think that also we have though to recognize that the contemporary music experience, especially with musics that are a little less or more challenging to hear,
mhm,
sometimes is not music that we should expect to be consumed as a commodified objects, right? Like it's not music that we should expect to be consumed by people going to Spotify or people buying albums.
right.
Uh, but sometimes it's just music that should be experienced as a community, like in person, uh,
Yeah.
in events that are in person events. So, and then people may go back home and not listen to that again. But if there are spaces where people can get together and experience this music, and like I said, hear the composers talk, and I
Mm.
think that can be a step forward, in the right direction.
Yeah, like live performance is always great. Oh,
Yeah, exactly. I know. Yeah. Yeah.
so unfortunately, that's all I have for you. But is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I just want to thank you for this chat. I think, it's always nice
Thank you. Yeah.
to share ideas with someone else, and so this is a project you have in your school right now.
Not with the school, but friends outside of school. Yeah, we
Oh,
we
cool.
all do. We all play instruments, and we all have like a shared interest for modern classical music. So I
That's
think
so
we
cool.
wanted to make it like a something that's shared with more people because I feel like people are so unaware of it.
Yeah, well, though you live in New York, right?
Yes, I live in New York.
Yeah, I mean, and in New York, people are more aware than in other places. So,
Yeah, maybe New
right.
Hampshire.
Yeah, but that's really cool. And how did you came across my work?
Oh, I was just looking at modern music on YouTube and your the Worm Overture came up
Uh-huh.
and it was
That's
just so
cool.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. That's really cool. Well, I'm grateful that you reach out to me.
No, yeah, thank you so much for making time today.
Yeah.
If you'd like, I could send you the video first before posting it. But
Yeah, yeah, for
okay,
sure.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I forgot well, I think if you want to share any of my pieces,
Mhm.
you can either let me know if you want me to provide the material, or you can just post any link from anything that
Okay,
if,
I'll email you about that. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. See you.
Yeah,
We
thank
should
you,
keep in
Hannah.
touch. Yeah, thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.